Our second presenter today is Brian Thomas. He has a degree in biology and also advanced degree in biotechnology. He has served in various teaching capacities, talking about the sciences and so forth. And he's going to be giving a presentation now on evidences for a recent creation. And once again, want to thank him for coming. And it's very, very good to see everybody here today. So, Brian, you have the floor.
Have you ever had a conversation like this, like I had a few years ago, where I thought, oh, I'm going to be evangelistic. I'm going to get to know this guy. And we're at a camp, so I'm walking with this guy. I said, sir, how are you doing today? And he said, oh, I'm good. Wondering why I'm like accosting him strangely. And I said, I raised a spiritual question. You know, what do you think about Jesus? Or what do you think about the Bible? Do you go to church? You know, just something spiritual. And he immediately frowned. He started to physically walk a different trajectory. So I thought, wow, this guy's playing hard to catch. You know, I'll chase after him. So I kept walking after him. And no, sir, I'm really curious. You know, how are you doing? And what do you believe? And just tell me what you believe. And he stopped. And he turned around to look at me as if to school dumb little me, the idiot. And he said, science has proven the Bible wrong. And he started to leave, and I thought, well, that's, you know, wow, just drop it down, why don't you? So that was a funny conversation, and what did I do? I actually did the right thing. I said, what science has proven the Bible wrong? I want to know. Basically, I want to know from you why you believe what you just said to me. But he physically put his hand out, and he walked away. But that's the question. What about science has proven the Bible wrong? What did he mean by that? It turns out we know what he means by that. What he means is secular scientists believe. Now, there's a difference between experimental science, that is, results from an experiment, and what a scientist believes about the whole of reality. Those are two different. But what secular scientists believe is that the world is billions of years old, and what the Bible teaches is that it's only thousands. And so, in his mind, science, meaning the scientific beliefs, or the beliefs of most scientists about the age of the world, has refuted the Bible and the Bible's claim of history being of a recent creation. And so this really is at the heart of what we do at ICR, at the Institute for Creation Research, is we are willing and able, as scientists, to examine the scientific evidence that supports recent creation, that supports the idea that the world may not be millions or billions of years old, may actually only be thousands of years old. And there's science to support that. Wow. Now, of course, the guy with his hand out is in no position or mood to listen to this scientific evidence that supports recent creation. But were he willing to even answer one of my honest questions, then we might work toward a conversation where we could talk about these things. But of course, you guys, because you're attending a creation conference, are willing to listen to this scientific evidence. And that's what we're all about. Because at the end of the day, I wish he would have stayed with the conversation long enough for us to talk about this evidence. But at the end of the day, you and he and people like him and us, we want to know the truth about our origins. We want to know where we came from. If the Bible got it right, it changes everything. And that was my story. I believed in evolution. I believed in millions of years. I believed I came from an ape-like ancestor millions of years ago, until someone finally got it through my thick skull that there's science that supports the Bible's version of history, that I came from Adam, not an ape, that I was created and crafted, like Psalm 33 says, my heart was made individually. God made each of our hearts individually. That makes a huge difference. knowing that my Creator loves me, thought about me before the creation of the whole world, wow. Now, what's my response? Everything changes. I live for Him now instead of living for myself, etc. So what are we doing? We're going to look at science today. And I'm going to show you these scientific evidences that support recent creation. We're going to start biology, and then we're going to go to astronomy. So we're going to do a lot of different disciplines today, and this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we can show you, or you can learn for yourself if you buy our resources. You can go to our website. We've got all kinds of articles for free that showcase evidences, scientific evidences for recent creation. What does science show? Let's look at mankind. Let's look at you and me. Let's look at population growth. Population growth is of the world population over time is charted here. You can see this growth slow at first, and then this is just an exponential growth rate. And so, so for you kids, exponential means this. It means you add a little bit more, and now that you have more, you can add even more. And now that you have more, you can add even more. And now that you have more, you can add even more faster. And so we start off with a growth rate of, what are we using here, 0.4%. Now that takes into account all the wars and all the diseases and all the plagues that mankind has suffered. But if you take that, here's the standard population growth formula. Now, you can't leave until you memorize this and perfectly apply it to 17 different examples. No, I'm just kidding. Just to show you that we have a formula that we can use. Population equals the starting population times the base of natural logarithms raised to the power of the rate times the time, and you just solve for t. No problem. But if you do that and you start with the following assumptions: 8 people, about 4,500 years. 8 people. Who are those 8? Noah's family. The 8 who seeded humanity after the flood. And you just apply the historically confirmed 0.4% population growth rate, and you plug in your time. You get 6.5 billion people in right about just before the year 2000. What was the population? Right before the year 2000, it was about 6.5 billion people. And so the population that we have today testifies to the history that's in the Bible, starting with pure Bible assumptions. Noah, Mrs. Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, Mrs. Shem, Mrs. Ham, Mrs. Japheth, they get off the ark. Just like it says in Genesis 10 and again in Genesis 11, all the nations of the earth started with that group, started with those people. And population growth rate confirms it. So here's my question for my friends who say, oh, science disproves the Bible. What they mean is evolution disproves the Bible. And there's no real science behind evolution, but that's a whole nother talk. If mankind is millions of years old, then why is there only thousands of years worth of population growth? So this is a question that I would ask them. How do you defend this? And by the way, they do have an answer for that. Here's their answer. Even though the population growth has been exponential of late, about 5,000 years ago, the population growth rate was 0. And it had been 0 for the prior 2 million years, which goes across next door, next block over. So that's the story that they're telling me is for 2 million years, depending on who, some say 6, some say 3, they don't really know. But for however long, millions of years, mankind, for every child that you give birth to, that a couple gives birth to, for every couple, they always have and only have 2 kids. So it's replacement growth. So that's the 0% growth rate. So mother, father, give birth to another mother, father. You can't have 3 kids or 4 or 5 or 6. You can't have 1 or 0 either. Overall, for the population, for 2 million years, at least, has replacement growth rate. No growth at all, 0 growth. What are the odds of that? And what are the odds that we would not find any evidence in the rocks of these millions of years of people? Where are their burial sites? Where are their trash mounds? 2 million years worth of trash? That's a lot of bones and garbage we should be finding. We don't find it anywhere. So that's another side argument, but this is a question that we need to ask our friends. It's an honest question. We have another one called the mutation rate. So if there's a population growth rate, you can also look at mutation rates. So a mutation, let's ignore that chart for a minute. Just look at me for a minute. A mutation is like it's like a typo error. So don't those frustrate you? You're typing a letter and you're about to turn it into the teacher, and you have to go back and get your eraser, and correct that error. It turns out our bodies can do that. We have error correction enzymes, actually a couple hundred of them in our cells, because what's happening to the DNA in our cells, the DNA contains the information, the instruction code to build that cell, to build your whole body. That's a lot of information, and it has to be exactly correct. And if we have enough typos in the DNA information, what's going to happen? The cells won't perform as efficiently. Eventually, enough of those typos or problems are going to cause death. I mean, you'll die. You'll have diseases or death if you have enough mutations. Now let's look at this chart. This chart shows, just ignore the green line, please. Look at the red line, which plots the decline in fitness. Decline in fitness. What does that mean? That means you're getting less and less suited to survive. Less and less healthy. More and more mutations cause this. And this is the number of generations. So we have about 350 generations before mankind, this is assuming a human genome, collapses and then basically goes extinct here. Now you can change these parameters in this program. This is a software that it's the world's most accurate population modeling software. It's freely downloadable. Scientists can use it, and others who are interested. It's called Mendel's Accountant. So download it, use it, have fun with it. And what you can do is you can adjust the population size. You can adjust how many kids each parent has, and then you can adjust how many kids have to die in order to get rid of the less fit. Okay? And so with the maximum evolution promoting parameters, we still get population collapse because of mutational meltdown after no more than 500 generations. So maximum estimate is about 500 generations before humanity goes kerplop. And like Frank said earlier, that's a scientific word, that's a biological word, kerplop. And it's a mutational meltdown. This is a real deal. This is not just fancy. You know what's fancy is just the opposite. Our kids watch these superhero movies, and what do they go see? The Hulk. How did the Hulk become the Hulk? Because he got irradiated and he got all these mutations. As though mutations give you superpowers. Give me a break. No, mutations make you go kerplop. They give you disease and then death. And so you can learn these kinds of things from our website, for example. Here's an article I wrote several years ago called The Human Mutation Clock is Ticking. And scientists had just published at that time their observation, empirical, measuring the DNA bases, 3.2 billion bases, that's letters in the code of a human genome, from one generation to the next. And it was a 3-generation study. And they found that on average, each generation adds at least 60 new mutations. So your dad and mom had 60 fewer mutations than you. Their dad and mom had 60 fewer mutations than them. And you back up the clock and you go all the way back to Adam and Eve, who had how many mutations? Zip. That's a biological word. Zippo. No mutations. Why? Because God made them perfectly. See, evolution has us going in the opposite direction of reality. Reality is we are heading downhill. And so that's what we're looking at here. And by the way, what is the estimate of how many generations have occurred since Adam? You can add up the genealogies in the Bible, all the way from Adam to Christ. You can count the total number of people from Adam to Christ. And it's about, and then what you do is you add from Christ until now, you can estimate, say, every 20 years is another generation, just to come up with some kind of an estimate. And if you do that, you add up the genealogies in the Bible from Adam to Christ, plus the number of generations from Christ until now, estimating at about 20 years, you come up with about 250 generations. So we're right about here on the chart. So yes, we have experienced a whole lot of mutations. Each one of us carries these mutations in us, and the clock is still ticking. Because the clock is still ticking, we must not have experienced 500 generations yet, according to the most favorable estimates, favorable for evolution. So it may be even fewer than 500 generations that our species can even last. So here's my question on that. If mankind is really millions of years old, then why are there only thousands of years worth of mutations? Sorry, but that got adjusted, but that says thousands of years worth of mutations. And I need to fix my slide again. Okay, that's it. So population and mutation. Those are two scientific evidences that show that mankind has only been on the planet for thousands of years, not millions. Let's move to the Earth, recent creation of Earth. For example, I'm looking at these rock layers, and I'm down here in Cedar Hill, south of Dallas, on FM 1382, and I've got these wonderful limestone layers, and there are fossils in these, which means I had to form fast. You have to have fast-flowing water to cover this creature. These are clams. Before the creature could get tossed in the surf and eaten, clamshells are actually eaten by other creatures. That didn't happen. These got preserved in mud, so they had to happen fast. So I'm thinking about the origin of rock layers, and I'm thinking about Mount St. Helens, and I'm thinking about these people who say that because you have rock layers take hundreds of thousands of years to form. And if you stack these rock layers, you're looking at millions of years worth of time just by looking at these layers, as though the layers have like a tag on it that says, I formed this long ago, I took this long to form. We have rocks, but what we don't have is what secular scientists don't have is the knowledge of firsthand science of how they didn't see the rocks form. They weren't there. Now, I wasn't there either. But guess what I do have? Number one, common sense. And number two, I have a record of people who did exist and lived through the flood. And so I'm using my common sense to put the clues together. So here's two clues that we can all understand. If one layer took thousands of years to form, then why does it have fossils? You see, because if a creature dies, when a creature dies in the field or by a stream or in a beach, in any of today's natural environments, if that creature dies, does it get preserved as a fossil? Is that normally what happens? No, it gets eaten by other creatures. It gets scoured and scavenged. It disappears. It gets recycled. Even a whale in the middle of the ocean, it falls to the seafloor. I'm talking about a 90-foot-long whale, bones and all. It gets completely recycled by special bone-eating worms called Osedax worms and other creatures, and it's completely recycled in a matter of months. Or if it's cold water, it's just a few years, just a couple years. So that didn't happen. It doesn't happen. Fossilization does not happen in the bottom of the sea. If you look at the bottom of calm lakes or at the bottom of oceans, are fossils forming down there? Negative. It's just mud. Bottom of the ocean is just mud, clams, and starfish. Fossils are not forming. Why? Because you've got to have a rapid catastrophe. And that's how you have to have fast-flowing mud in order to cover these creatures fast enough to preserve them. That's how you can possibly get a fossil. All right. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is, let's say I've got my hand on this rock layer right here. You're saying that it says that it accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, or maybe millions of years, but I'm looking at it going, wait a minute, it has fossils, and over just a few years, not even 100 years, not even 1,000 years. You're telling me hundreds of thousands of years this clamshell sat there and never got eaten by all the creatures I know actually eat clamshells or bones or whatever that fossil might be? Give me a break. Common sense. The story doesn't add up. What story does add up? That this whole sheet was deposited with one wash, just like that, and covered these creatures. What about the gaps? What about the gaps in between the layers? So here's a rock layer, and then there's a gap. There's actually no gap. There's just a difference in this rock to that rock. And then another difference. So this is pretty interesting, because in the 1980s, geologists looked at this and said, this layer took hundreds of thousands of years. But then they started seeing that catastrophes can form layers fast. 1980, Mount St. Helens changed a lot of ways that geologists think, even secular geologists. So what did they do? In order to preserve their idea that this whole column was deposited over millions of years, they came and said this. Now, right here, between the deposition of this layer and the one above it, that's when millions of years elapsed. So we're going to squeeze our millions of years of time into a place where there is no evidence to even look at. So we're saying this happened by a local flood, and then millions of years passed, and another local flood happened to deposit the next layer. And then millions of years passed here, and then another. That's the story that's now being told. Since the 1990s, that's the story I was taught when I took geology classes, and we did our field trips. And the professor said, now here we've got millions of years that happened in this gap. And we're thinking, well, where's the evidence of it? There's no evidence of it. In fact, there's evidence against it, because if those millions of years really happened, erosion would have happened, right? So what would you expect to see? You'd expect to see not a straight flat line, but erosion ruts. Are you with me? Where are the erosion ruts from millions of years of erosion? Did erosion not happen for millions of years? That's the story that they have to tell. So here's my question. If millions of years passed between each layer, then why are there no erosion ruts? And we'll just move on through here. Second evidence from Earth. Look at this. What is that? Tail, legs. What kind of creature do you think? Has scales? It's a fossil lizard. It's a fossil lizard. And the color of it, it's dark, but this is shale rock. Why is this dark and that's tan? What makes this dark? Scientists zoomed in on this little square portion. Here's the blow-up view of it. And they found that this really is dark, and this really is light from the shale. And they looked at what makes that dark. You know what they found? Protein. Protein is still in the rock. Well, guys, protein doesn't last even 1 million years. Protein has a short shelf life. Here's a mosasaur fossil. I got to see it just last year, about a year ago, in Los Angeles County Museum. And they've got, this mosasaur has a little red patch right here in its rib cage, right where its heart was. And the scientists studying this in 2010 published the decay remnants of hemoglobin protein. Proteins still in this mosasaur fossil. So here's my question. If the Earth is millions of years old, then why do we find soft tissue fossils? Why do we find proteins still in the fossils? That's a question. That's a question that we need to ask our friends. For example, here's this mummified frog. It was caught in a volcanic deposit that's surrounded by ash that later hardened into stone. It happened during the Ice Age in Spain. So here we have this frog. Now, so what they did, they cracked open the femur bone, and look what they found inside the femur bone. This is still colored red, and that's right where, in modern frogs, bone marrow produces blood. So it's still red, probably bloody. This is from a Tyrannosaurus rex thigh bone from Montana. look at that, and it's white, flexible, soft, stretchy tissue that rebounds back into position. Wow, there's plenty of proteins in dinosaur fossils. Shouldn't be there. We even have proteins inside amber fossils. And there's nothing about amber that's magical that makes proteins last long. Proteins fall apart just like every other chemical over time. We even have carbon-14 in fossils. That's another evidence that the Earth is thousands, not millions of years old. We found carbon-14 in fossils, diamonds, coal, and oil. In fact, it's routinely found in those Earth materials. Anything that has carbon in it has carbon-14 in it. And here's the thing about that. Carbon-14 has a maximum shelf life based on its measured decay rate of only 100,000 years. So if you find carbon-14 in a thing, whether it's a diamond, a lump of coal, a blob of oil, or a dinosaur fossil, can it be any older than 100,000 years? Shouldn't be any older. Now, if the flood deposited these things, then it's only 4,500 years old or so. Is 4,500 years younger than 100,000? Sure. So it fits, you see. But calling it 1 million years or 50 million or whatever imaginary number you want to put on it does not fit the fact that there's carbon-14 still in it. Why isn't this information in the Perot Museum? We want this information in there. If not as a question, it's not as an answer, we can at least pose it as a question. It's an honest scientific discovery. We found carbon-14 in all these things. What about continents? By the way, that's why we want to build our museum. We can have a museum where we can show these, we can ask these questions, we can show that evidence right there in the museum to get people to think, oh wow, there's science that supports a biblical age of the world. Yes, there is. The fact that we have continents is one of them. Continents, like Frank was showing in the last hour, erode. So erosion is constantly happening. And so scientists, secular geologists, measure the erosion rate of continents, and based on that rate, we should have no continents. We should live in a water world after only 40 million years. And yet they're claiming that many of these rocks are hundreds of millions of years old. It doesn't fit. It doesn't match. The story that they're telling about the age of the Earth does not match the erosion rate that we actually measure on the Earth. So that erosion rate indicates a water world after only 40 or so million years. But the fact that we still have continents must mean that the Earth's surface is younger than 40 million years. Is 4,500 years younger than 40 million? Yes, but 500 million years is, they even say that some rocks are billions of years old. Yeah, so if the Earth is billions of years old, then why do we even have continents? Now let's go to outer space. Who's ready to go to space? You're like, I'm ready to go home. No, it's not that bad, is it? Let's go to the solar system. This is a comet called Hartley 2. Comets are amazing. These are amazing. They're basically ice, balls of rock and ice that are flinging around these highly eccentric orbits. So they go really close to the sun, and then they swing way out. Some of them, long-period comets, go outside of the orbit of Pluto, and then they come back. Some comets, takes them a long time. So look at this one, though. They had a spacecraft that in, I think, 2011 caught these images. This particular comet is shaped like a dumbbell, and we know that when a comet flings around and gets really close to the sun, solar radiation does what? It erodes that comet, and the outer surface of that comet vaporizes. Sometimes the gravitational pull of the sun scrunches up the comet and crushes it, and then all those bits get vaporized. And just last year, for example, the news heralded, this will be the comet of the century, and it went around the backside of the sun, and we never saw it again. Why? Comets are dying. They are falling apart. In fact, we can measure the average, we can estimate the dying rate or the erosion rate of comets and find that 10,000 years is a reasonable maximum age for comets, about 10,000 years. And yet we've got plenty of comets. Where did these come from? Well, I went to the Perot Museum to find out because, you know, they know everything. So I went to the astronomy display, and they're at the Perot Museum, and it says, comets come from this place called the Oort cloud, where there's a collection of rocks and ice out there beyond Pluto, and they feed the solar system with a comet every so often, and that's where they come from. And so I asked Dr. Lyle, our astronomer, he's astrophysicist at the Institute, Dr. Lyle, what about this Oort cloud? What evidence is there for the Oort cloud? And he said, no one has ever seen any part of this Oort cloud with any kind of a telescope. Hubble hasn't seen it. There's no Oort cloud. You see, they have invented an Oort cloud in order to explain comets. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to be a bad scientist like that. You don't have to say, oh, the Oort cloud. It's like this imaginary place. It doesn't even exist in reality. At least hasn't been scientifically verified. If, you don't have to do that. If what? If you allow in your mind the possibility that these comets are only thousands of years old. So the time, in order to rescue millions of years, they supply an Oort cloud that doesn't even exist. Not only that, look at these jets. So Comet Hartley 2 is jetting out carbon dioxide and other gases into space, all on its own. We don't know what fuels that or powers those jets, and we don't know why this thing is still there if it's billions of years old or millions of years, you know, in a context of millions of years without an Oort cloud. So, however, if God made these comets only thousands of years ago, then it stands to reason that they could still be spinning in space from that original creation. It stands to reason that they could still have enough material left in them to be spitting stuff out into space even as they continue to fling around the sun. So there's comets. Why are there even comets if the solar system is billions of years old? Please explain this to me. Inquiring minds want to know. Why are there still comets? What about Saturn, one of the most beautiful of all of our planets? Saturn is an enigma for old age thinking, whether it's creation or evolution. Most people believe in millions and billions of years, but if you hold to that, then, by the way, this is a photo. Isn't that amazing? It's stunning. Its rings are clean. Look at those rings. They're like shiny. So the Hubble zooms in, you can zoom in on these rings, and it's literally like it was recently snowing, like a fresh fallen snow. But there is dust out here in space. And if this is millions of years old, let alone billions, those ice particles should be covered with dust. And we should see some dirty black rings. But we don't. We see like freshly made rings, like it's only, say, hundreds or thousands of years old on those rings. What about the heat? Scientists estimate that Saturn can generate heat, what's called tidal flexing. So it'll squinch up when it's close to the sun, and then it'll rebound when it's further away from the sun on its orbit around the sun. I don't remember how long a Saturnian year is, but it's not 365 Earth days. But anyway, that process does this. Over the years, Saturn does this, which generates friction. So maybe there's some, and there is. This is an actual process that's actually going on. Saturn is putting out heat because of tidal friction. But that's only 1/6 of the measured amount of heat that this, it's too hot. It's a hot potato. You take a hot potato and you put it out on the table, what happens after a few hours to your hot potato? Say it cools off. It cools off. Yes. So you can touch it. You can't touch it at first, but you let it cool off because over time heat dissipates. Same with Saturn. Why is it still so hot? Maybe it's because it was only created thousands of years ago. And finally, we're going to look at the big picture, the big grand universe. And in the universe, we have these structures called galaxies. I think the most beautiful, picturesque galaxies are the spiral galaxies, which are a problem for old age thinking. They really are. Because these spiral galaxies are defined by their arms. Do you see these arms? So this one swings out and around like this. And this next one swings out and around like this. So basically there's two arms on this one and they wind around. So I'm going to be a galaxy here, and then the arms may start straight, but the inside of the galaxy turns faster than the outside, and it curls up on itself like this. And so eventually these arms will merge, they'll wind up on one another, and it becomes a galactic disk. And we can estimate the time it takes for the inside to turn and the time it takes for these outer arms to spin, and it doesn't match. So it takes, the claim is that these are billions of years old, but the spiral wind-up problem says, well, if it's billions of years old, then it should not have any arms left. After only 100 or so million years, 100 million years in astronomy is like, you know, a couple seconds to an evolutionist. So after only hundreds of millions of years, say, you should have a blur. You shouldn't have these arms. But this is supposed to be, what, 10 billion years old or something? So there's a huge discrepancy. And of course, there's a rescuing device for that too. So we ask them this question: how can you have spiral arms in a galaxy that's supposed to be billions of years old? Well, there are gravitational bands. So there's gravity bands that keep pulling the matter into these arms, which of course begs the question of what? Where do the gravity bands come from, and why do they follow the same exact pattern as the arms? It's imaginative. That's all it is. So we shouldn't have spiral galaxies in a universe that's billions of years old, but if God created those spiral galaxies only thousands of years ago, he could have created them with that pattern. He could have created them straight and then wound them up, because he can do anything. So here's my question: if spiral galaxies are billions of years old, then why have they not wound into disks? An honest question that we can ask our friends. And where's all the missing supernova remnants? This is fantastic confirmation of recent creation. Have you heard about supernova remnants, SNRs? Who studied SNRs? You're in the right place, because I get to teach you about supernova remnants. What's a supernova? It's when a star does what? Explodes. It's a star explosion. When a star explodes, guess what it leaves in space? Star guts. So this is a pile of star guts. And every time a star explodes, it leaves behind star guts. Every star is finite. There's no such thing as an infinite star. So it has to eventually die. And it turns out that if the universe is billions of years old, like it says on Nova, TV, Perot Museum, etc., movies, if it's really billions of years old, we should look out into the night sky. And instead of seeing all these well-formed stars and galaxies, we should see star guts, star guts, star guts, 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 guts. We should see supernova remnants, billions of years worth. Guess how many, at today's supernova formation rate, or supernova remnant formation rate, at today's rate, extrapolating today's rate into the past, how many supernova remnants, how much time has elapsed? Well, we have about 7,000 years worth of supernova remnants in the night sky. Isn't that amazing? Who would have thought? Where are all the missing supernovas, supernova remnants? They're just not out there. So we have powerful evidence of recent creation in outer space. And the last evidence I'm going to give you today has to do with blue stars. Can you see the different colors of stars in this? This is called the Hubble Deep Field Photo. If you'll ignore the little green circles, we're just looking at different colors of stars. Okay? Either you're noticing them and you're not telling me that you are, or you really don't see them. But I promise you there's different colors of stars. Yeah, okay. I didn't mean to click that, sorry. Some of these stars are blue. Look at them. Blue, 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 blue. Some are red, some are green, not green, some are yellow and orange. But the blue stars are intriguing. They're like the SUVs of the star world. Gas guzzlers. So a blue star burns through its fuel in only about 1 million years. So by just measuring the luminosity of these stars, And you do some calculations. I don't, but our astrophysicist, Dr. Lyle, can. And he's shown me, and this is in secular reports too, that these stars will burn through their fuel in only 1 million years because it takes that much fuel to make that much light. Okay? And they're putting out a whole lot of light. Wow. Wait a minute. That means this star has to be fewer than 1 million years old. Like maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe 6,000 years old. Could it be 6,000 years old? Well, sure, because that's fewer than 1 million, isn't it? And that's the age of the world according to the account of the people who wrote the Bible, who lived through these events. Guys like Adam, who were actually there in the beginning. They said the number of years that they were alive, and they wrote it down. They said, this is the book of the generations of Adam, Genesis 5:1, etc., throughout the Bible. So we have a star that is younger than 1 million years. These blue stars aren't just in one little pocket. They're in the middle of galactic cores in distant galaxies. We found them there. We've even found them just in space, not associated with any galaxy. So, blue stars up, blue stars down, blue stars left, blue stars right. All over the universe, we have young-looking stars. Blue stars. They look young. Recent creation. They haven't yet exploded. Where are all the supernova remnants from all these blue stars that have supposedly existed for billions of years of the universe? Guys, it looks like it's only thousands of years old. So, we got questions. With all this evidence of recent creation, why do so many people insist on millions of years? And I think a few answers are, that's just all they've been taught and told. That's my answer. That's all I was taught. I never was shown these different evidences for recent creation until I started reading creation books like we want you to buy here. Evolution requires that in other words, if we're going to believe that we evolved from a chimpanzee-like creature, then we have to have billions of years. If we're going to push God out of our thinking, pretend that he doesn't exist, then we're going to replace him with a whole new history. And so that's what we've done. So there's a spiritual reason why scientists, secular scientists, deny creation, they deny the flood, they deny the biblical history, not because the science isn't there for it. We've got plenty of science to support the Bible, straightforward Bible. But because if they admit that the Bible is right in any way, guess what they have to do? They have to reckon with their Creator. If the Bible's right, if he actually made me, then I've done wrong, and I have to repent, and I have to believe. And that's too much for some to want to do. And that's what the Bible teaches. So here's our resources for you today. We've got creation basics, and you've got questions. I want to learn more evidences for a recent creation. That's in these books. These books, the content does not overlap. So you can read one and learn a whole new set of excellent information from the other. But the second book here, I really want to extol the virtues of creation basics and beyond. And then I'll release you to go do exactly that. All of our scientists have co-authored this, and each of us has taken, basically, in our field of expertise, what is it that people ask the most questions about? What are we most curious about? And so we contributed all these different, we have theology questions. Some of you are thinking, you know, Uncle Bob used to say that a day is 1,000 years is worth a day, and that means that the days of creation, what about all that? It's in basics and beyond. Others of you are thinking, you know, I've seen Jurassic World, the movie. You know, and in Jurassic World, they've got this story of these feathered dinosaurs. Were there really feathers on dinosaurs? That's in here. It's any of these popular questions on origins. Are humans and chimpanzees really genetically identical? We can show you exactly why not in this book. Basics and Beyond, to answer a lot of those questions, not just to answer your questions for the sake of your curiosity, but to do this. It's also designed to equip you to ask other people questions, to challenge your friends and your neighbors and your family members. Really, you believe that? What about this? I want to know what you think about this. And you can arm yourself and equip yourself and the next generation with these kinds of books. This is why we do what we do. Now, I can speak, and you'll remember, according to surveys, about 10% of what I say. And as boring and lame as I am, it's probably about 3%. But when you get a book in your hands, you can go back to it. And when people write in and say, thank you so much, you have changed my life, you've changed the way I think, they never say, thank you so much for your talk, it changed the way I think. They always say, thank you so much for your book, because I got into this book and it changed the whole way that I think. And that's my testimony too, because I read one of the early creation books. That's what moved me from evolution to creation. So I encourage you to get these books, and I encourage you to do this. Believe the Bible. You can trust it 100%. Science supports every bit of it. Have a good afternoon.